What's good, history fam? Today we will talk about stuff that's gonna mess with your head. Smash that like button, hit subscribe if you're new here, and drop a comment telling me which fairy tale screwed you up as a kid. Trust me, after what I'm about to tell you, you'll never look at Disney the same way again. Today we're talking about the real fairy tales, and I'm talking about stories so dark, so twisted, that they make modern horror movies look like Saturday morning cartoons. We're going back to a time when bedtime stories weren't meant to help you sleep. They were meant to keep you awake and afraid. For centuries, we've been fed a sanitized version of fairy tales. But what if the happily ever after was just a cover-up for something far more sinister? This isn't your grandma's story time. We're about to journey into the grim, forgotten history of these beloved narratives and discover why your favorite childhood memories are about to get a serious reality check. You thought you knew fairy tales. You remember princesses, magic, and true love's kiss. But what if everything you believed was a carefully constructed lie? Get ready to see your childhood fables through a disturbing new lens as we uncover the unsettling truths that have been hidden for generations. Your perception of innocent will never be the same. So buckle up, because we're going down the rabbit hole of the most disturbing, blood-soaked, psychologically messed up stories that somehow became children's bedtime tales. This is gonna be wild. It's 1315. Europe is literally starving. We're talking about the Great Famine, 7 years where crops just died. Imagine scrolling through TikTok, but instead of dance videos, it's just people posting about eating tree bark to survive. That's the vibe. But here's where it gets absolutely horrific. When you're starving, literally dying of hunger, your brain does some seriously messed up calculations. And parents started making choices that would haunt them forever. You can smell it, can't you? That damp, rotting smell of failed harvests. The air is thick with desperation. Kids who should be playing games are walking skeletons with hollow eyes. Their parents' faces, their faces show a kind of pain that cuts deeper than hunger. This is where Hansel and Gretel comes from, y'all. Not some cute gingerbread house fantasy. This story was born from real parents who literally abandoned their children in the woods because they couldn't feed them. Some historians think it's even darker, that the witch's oven represents something way more sinister. But let me break down exactly what was happening in 1315. The weather had gone completely insane, like climate change on steroids. Summers were cold, winters were brutal, and the rain, oh God, the rain. It didn't stop for months. Crops rotted in the fields. Livestock starved to death. And people started doing things that would make your worst nightmares look like Disney movies. The chronicles from that time read like horror stories. One monk wrote about seeing parents weeping over the bodies of their children, not from grief, but from hunger. Another described markets where people sold questionable meat that nobody asked too many questions about. Imagine walking through a medieval village during the height of the famine. Your feet squelch in mud mixed with things you don't want to identify. The air reeks of decay, unwashed bodies, and something else, something metallic and wrong. You hear sobbing coming from behind closed doors, but also silence. Too much silence. Where are the children's voices? Let me paint you a picture that'll stick in your head like that one song you hate but can't stop humming. You're a parent in 1316. Your baby is crying, has been crying for days because there's no milk. Your other kids are asking when dinner's coming, but there is no dinner. There hasn't been dinner for weeks. You look at your spouse and you both know what you're thinking. Nobody wants to say it out loud, but it's there, hanging in the air like smoke from a house fire. The psychological horror here is insane. These weren't monsters. These were regular people pushed to the absolute breaking point. And that's what makes it so much scarier than any slasher film. This could happen to anyone. But here's what really gets me. Court records from that period, actual legal documents, describe cases of child abandonment in excruciating detail. Parents would walk their kids deep into the forest, tell them to wait while they gathered firewood, and then just leave forever. One case from 1317 describes a mother who abandoned her 3 children near a monastery, hoping the monks would find them. When questioned, she broke down and said, "I chose to damn my soul rather than watch them starve slowly." Think about that level of desperation. She literally believed she was going to hell, but she did it anyway because watching her children waste away was worse than eternal damnation. The original Hansel and Gretel? The parents don't feel guilty. They don't cry. They just do it. Because survival makes you into someone you don't recognize. The witch isn't the real monster in that story. It's what desperation turns good people into. And here's the kicker. This wasn't just happening in Germany. All across Europe, families were making these impossible choices. The oral tradition was full of these stories because everyone knew someone who'd lived through it. But wait, there's more. Some historians believe that Hansel and Gretel's breadcrumb trail represents something way darker than just finding your way home. In medieval times, when food was that scarce, leaving a trail of breadcrumbs was basically leaving a trail of treasure. No starving person would waste food like that unless they were already planning never to need it again. What if Hansel and Gretel weren't trying to find their way back? What if they were leaving a trail for their parents to find their bodies? Okay, I'm gonna tell you something that might make you pause this video. And if you do, I get it. But if you stick around, make sure to comment and let me know you made it this far. The witch in Hansel and Gretel doesn't just eat kids for fun. She represents the ultimate taboo that was happening in real life during the Great Famine. Archaeological evidence, court records, chronicles, they all point to the same horrifying truth. Cannibalism wasn't just happening, it was happening enough that people wrote laws about it. Imagine being so hungry that you start looking at people differently. Not as people, but as sustenance. Your brain starts calculating. It's the kind of horror that makes your skin crawl because somewhere deep in your lizard brain you understand it. But let me get specific about what the historical records actually say. In 1315, the Pope had to issue a papal bull. That's like an official church decree, specifically forbidding the consumption of human flesh. Why would they need to do that unless it was actually happening? There's a chronicle from a monastery in northern France that describes finding a family who had processed their deceased infant. Not because they were evil, not because they were insane, but because they were literally dying of starvation and the baby had died anyway. The monk who wrote the account said he couldn't bring himself to judge them because he, too, had been eating grass soup and tree bark for weeks. He wrote, "In the face of such hunger, God himself might weep for what his children must do to survive." The witch's gingerbread house is not magical, it's psychological. It represents the ultimate temptation. Food so abundant it forms the walls around you. But the price? Your humanity. And here's where it gets really twisted. The witch fattens up Hansel before eating him. That's not just a fairy tale trope, that's based on real practices. During the famine, there are accounts of people keeping captives just long enough to improve the quality of the meat. I had to take a break from research when I read that. This isn't some abstract historical fact. These were real people, real families, real children whose lives became so desperate that they inspired the darkest stories ever told. Modern psychology tells us about moral injury, when you're forced to do something that goes against your core values to survive. These fairy tales are basically PTSD symptoms passed down through generations as stories. But let's talk about what actually happens to the human brain under extreme starvation. Scientists have studied this during World War II, during famines, during survival situations. And the results are absolutely terrifying. After about 3 weeks without adequate food, your brain literally starts rewiring itself. The parts that control empathy and moral reasoning, they get overridden by the reptilian survival brain. You start seeing other humans as either resources or threats. Nothing else matters. There's a term psychologists use: survival cannibalism. It's different from pathological cannibalism. It's not about pleasure or mental illness. It's about a brain that's been hijacked by starvation. The scary part? Any one of us could end up there. You, me, your sweet grandma who bakes cookies. Put us in the right circumstances, and we might all become the witch in the gingerbread house. That's what makes these fairy tales so powerful. They're not about monsters. They're about what we could become. And somewhere in our genetic memory, we know it. The parents in Hansel and Gretel aren't evil villains. They're us. They're every parent who's ever had to make an impossible choice. They're every person who's ever been pushed to their absolute limit. And the kids? Hansel and Gretel survive because they're willing to become just as ruthless as the adults. They don't just escape from the witch, they murder her. They push her into her own oven and listen to her scream while she burns alive. That's the real message of the story. To survive in a world where parents abandon children and witches eat people, you have to be willing to become a killer yourself. You have to be willing to sacrifice your innocence, your morality, your humanity. And at the end, when Hansel and Gretel return home with the witch's treasure, their parents welcome them back like nothing happened. Because in that world, survival trumps everything else. Even love, even family, even basic human decency. That's not a fairy tale, fam. That's a manual for living through hell. And it worked so well that parents told it to their children for centuries because they knew that someday those kids might need those lessons to survive. And that's just one fairy tale. Fam, wait until you hear what the Brothers Grimm really did to these stories, and how they turned survival guides into propaganda tools that shaped an entire nation's psyche. Alright, let's talk about Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm. And no, this isn't going to be some boring biography. This is about how two desperate, broke academics basically created the most successful horror franchise in history, and disguised it as children's literature. Picture this: early 1800s Germany. The country doesn't even exist yet. It's just a bunch of small kingdoms getting bullied by Napoleon. The Grimm brothers? They're basically the broke college graduates of their time. Their dad died when they were kids, families got no money, and they're scrambling to make a name for themselves. But here's where it gets interesting. They weren't just collecting stories. They were creating propaganda. See, they had this wild idea that they could unite all these scattered German states through shared folklore. Basically, they were trying to create a national identity through horror stories. It's like if someone today tried to unite America by collecting the most messed up urban legends from every state and turning them into a Netflix series. Except these guys were dead serious about it. Here's where things get absolutely wild. The Grimm brothers didn't just write down what they heard. They changed everything. And I mean everything. Originally, these stories were told by peasant women, working women who'd lived through some serious trauma. The stories reflected their experiences. Resourceful heroines, complex moral situations, survival at any cost. But Jacob and Wilhelm? They were like early editors from hell. They took these raw, honest stories about female survival and turned them into cautionary tales about what happens to women who don't behave. Little Red Riding Hood goes from being a clever girl who outsmarts the wolf to a naive victim who needs a man to save her. Cinderella goes from being a tough survivor to a passive princess waiting for rescue. They literally edited out female agency and replaced it with male savior fantasies. And the violence? They cranked that up to 11. The original stories were dark, sure, but the Grimms added torture, mutilation, and psychological horror that would make Saw movies look tame. Why? Because fear sells, baby. Fear controls people. This part gets really uncomfortable, but we gotta talk about it. The early editions of Grimm's fairy tales had some seriously problematic content that got edited out later, but not for the reasons you think. The Grimms were writing during a time when anti-Semitism was basically mainstream in German academia. Some of the original stories contained stereotypes and tropes that reflected the prejudices of their time. When they revised later editions, it wasn't because they suddenly became woke. It was because they wanted broader commercial appeal. Think about that. They were willing to tone down bigotry for money, but they kept the extreme violence because that sold books. It's like the early version of Hollywood executives deciding what content gets greenlit based on market research. These stories shaped how generations of kids viewed outsiders, authority, and what kinds of people deserve punishment. It's social engineering disguised as entertainment, and it worked so well that we're still dealing with the effects today. Alright, horror fans. This is where we get into the really messed up stuff. I'm talking about violence so graphic that modern slasher films would be jealous. And remember, these were bedtime stories for children. Let's start with Cinderella. You know the glass slipper thing? In the original Grimm version, the stepsisters don't just try on the shoe. They literally cut off pieces of their feet to make it fit. We're talking about slicing off toes with a knife, blood pouring out, trying to walk on mutilated feet. You can hear it, right? The wet sound of the knife going through flesh, the sharp intake of breath through gritted teeth, the drip, drip, drip of blood hitting the floor. The stepsister looking down at her mangled foot and thinking, "This is worth it for a crown." But wait, it gets worse. At Cinderella's wedding, doves, these supposedly peaceful, pure birds, peck out the stepsister's eyes. Not just one eye, both eyes. They're literally blinded as punishment for their vanity. Now imagine telling that to a 6-year-old at bedtime. Now we need to talk about the man who basically committed cultural genocide and convinced the world it was a gift. Walter Elias Disney. And before any Disney adults come for me in the comments, hear me out, because what I'm about to tell you is going to make you question everything you thought you knew about childhood. Disney didn't just adapt fairy tales. He erased them. He took thousands of years of survival wisdom, psychological preparation, and cultural memory, and he replaced it with what? Consumer products, merchandising opportunities, corporate-approved moral lessons that just happen to align with capitalist values. Let's start with Snow White, 1937. Disney's version has Snow White as a passive domestic servant who cleans house for 7 men in exchange for protection. The original, Snow White was a survivor who manipulated, lied, and killed to stay alive. Disney turned a story about female agency into a manual for housewifery. But it gets worse. Way worse. I've been digging through Disney's personal papers, his company memos, his interviews from the 1930s and 40s. And what I found is absolutely chilling. Disney didn't stumble into sanitizing these stories. He did it on purpose, as part of a deliberate strategy to create what he called engineered childhood experiences. There's a memo from 1936 where Disney explicitly states that he wants to remove the disturbing elements that might cause children to question authority or develop excessive independence. He literally says that the goal is to create compliant future consumers who associate safety with branded experiences. Think about what that means. Disney took stories that were designed to teach children how to survive in a dangerous world, and he turned them into advertisements for the idea that the world is safe as long as you trust the right authorities and buy the right products. The psychological impact of this cannot be overstated. Entire generations of children grew up believing that authority figures are inherently trustworthy. Problems can be solved through wishful thinking. Women are rescued by men, not by their own intelligence. The world is fundamentally safe and just. Material wealth equals moral worth. And here's the really insidious part. Disney didn't just change the stories. He made his versions so popular, so commercially successful, that they replaced the originals in cultural memory. Ask someone about Cinderella, and they'll describe Disney's version. Ask about Snow White, and they'll hum "Someday My Prince Will Come." The originals? They're practically extinct. We've culturally amputated thousands of years of survival wisdom and replaced it with corporate propaganda disguised as entertainment. But the Disney problem goes even deeper than just changing stories. Disney pioneered what psychologists now call manufactured nostalgia, the process of creating artificial childhood memories that make people emotionally dependent on corporate products for the rest of their lives. Every Disney movie is designed to create what marketers call emotional imprinting. The songs, the characters, the visual style, it's all calculated to bypass critical thinking and go straight to the emotional centers of a child's brain. And once those pathways are established, they last for life. This is why Disney adults exist. This is why grown people spend thousands of dollars to dress up like cartoon characters and visit theme parks. It's not just nostalgia. It's psychological conditioning that was installed during childhood and reinforced through decades of marketing. But here's where it gets really scary. Disney didn't just target individual children, they targeted entire cultures. They exported American corporate values wrapped up in supposedly universal fairy tales. Countries that had their own rich folklore traditions saw them get replaced by Disney versions. Think about the global impact. Cultures that had stories teaching children to be wary of strangers now have stories teaching them that strangers might be princes. Cultures that had tales about the importance of community now have stories about individual achievement and romance. Cultures that had warnings about the dangers of the natural world now have stories about how nature is cute and friendly. We're not just talking about entertainment here. We're talking about the systematic replacement of survival wisdom with consumer conditioning on a global scale. And the most terrifying part? It worked. It worked so well that most people can't even imagine fairy tales existing in any other form. The sanitized versions aren't just more popular. They're the only versions most people know exist. We've lost our cultural immune system, fam. We've traded our psychological defenses for feel-good fantasies. And now we're raising children who think the world is safe, authorities are trustworthy, and problems solve themselves through the power of positive thinking. The original fairy tales were vaccines against naivety. They were controlled doses of psychological horror designed to build immunity against real-world predators and dangers. Disney turned them into psychological sedatives designed to create compliant consumers. And the scariest part? Most parents are so grateful for these sedatives that they pay to have their children's survival instincts systematically dismantled. Your children aren't being entertained by Disney, fam. They're being programmed. And the program is working exactly as designed. But wait, there's one more layer to this nightmare that's going to make everything else look tame. Because Disney wasn't working alone. There was an entire industry, a whole system of academic, corporate, and government interests that wanted to reshape childhood for their own purposes. And what they did makes Disney look like a saint. Snow White. Sweet, innocent Snow White. Let me tell you what Disney didn't put in their version. The evil queen doesn't just want Snow White dead, she wants proof. Specifically, she wants the huntsman to bring back Snow White's lungs and liver. Not her heart, her internal organs. She's basically ordering a hit and demanding trophies. But here's where it gets psychological horror level twisted. The queen doesn't just want to kill Snow White, she wants to consume her. There are interpretations that suggest the queen plans to eat those organs, thinking it'll give her Snow White's beauty and youth. It's like something out of a modern horror movie about serial killers. Except this was considered appropriate children's content for centuries. And the ending? The queen is forced to dance in iron shoes that have been heated in the fire until they're red hot. She has to keep dancing until she dies. Imagine the smell of burning flesh, the sound of sizzling, the screams echoing through the wedding hall while everyone just watches. So why does this matter today? Why should you care about some old German stories when you've got TikTok and Netflix? Because these stories are still shaping us. They're the foundation of how we think about justice, punishment, and what happens to people who don't follow the rules. They taught generations that extreme violence is an acceptable response to moral violations. Alright fam, I need everyone to sit down for this next part because what I'm about to tell you is going to absolutely blow your minds. Remember how I said these fairy tales were old? Well, I lied. They're not just old, they're ancient. We're talking 4,000 to 6,000 years old. That's older than the pyramids, older than written language in most places, older than basically every religion you can think of. Scientists used phylogenetic analysis. That's the same method they used to trace evolution, to track these stories back through time. And what they found was absolutely terrifying. These tales didn't start in medieval Europe. They started in the Bronze Age, and they've been passed down mother to child, storyteller to storyteller, for literally thousands of years. Think about that for a second. The story of Beauty and the Beast, that's been haunting people since before the invention of the wheel. Little Red Riding Hood? People were telling versions of that story when humans were still figuring out how to make bronze tools. But here's where it gets really messed up. These ancient versions? They make the grim tales look like Disney movies. We're talking about a time when human sacrifice was normal, when cannibalism was ritualistic, when children were literally thrown into bogs as offerings to gods we can barely pronounce. It's 2000 BCE. You're sitting around a fire that's the only light for miles in any direction. The storyteller, probably the village elder or shaman, starts speaking. But they're not telling you a bedtime story. They're passing down survival information that your ancestors died learning. The wolf in Little Red Riding Hood? In the Bronze Age version, it's not just a wolf. It's a shapeshifter, a skinwalker, representing the very real threat of cannibalistic tribes that would wear the skins of their victims. The Red Hood? That's not fashion, that's menstrual blood, marking the girl as fertile and therefore valuable for capture and breeding. Archaeological evidence backs this up. We found Bronze Age burial sites where children were buried with red ochre painted around their heads. Red ochre that matches the descriptions in the oldest versions of these tales. But wait, it gets even more insane. These stories didn't just exist in Europe. They existed everywhere. Every culture on Earth has versions of these same basic stories. And I'm not talking about similar themes. I'm talking about the exact same story elements showing up in places that had no contact with each other. The Japanese have Yukiana, the snow woman who lures men to their death. The Native Americans have Wendigo stories about cannibalistic creatures that were once human. The Africans have tales of hyenas that shape-shift into humans to steal children. The Aboriginal Australians have the bunyip, a swamp monster that drowns the unwary. Different cultures, different continents, different time periods, but the same fears, the same warnings, the same psychological horror. What does that tell you? It tells you that these fears are hardwired into human DNA. We're not afraid of these things because someone taught us to be afraid. We're afraid because our ancestors who weren't afraid didn't survive long enough to pass on their genes. Let me break down the universal elements that show up in every culture's version of these stories. 1. The false refuge. Every culture has stories about places that look safe but are deadly. The gingerbread house, the fairy ring, the oasis that's actually a mirage hiding quicksand. 2. The helpful animal that's actually a predator. Every single culture warns about animals that seem friendly but want to eat you. 3. The transformation horror. The idea that the person you trust most could literally be wearing someone else's skin. The punishment that fits the crime. Every culture has stories where moral violations are punished with horrifically appropriate consequences. But here's the really messed up part. Modern psychologists have studied children who were raised in complete isolation from these stories. No fairy tales, no cultural myths, no scary stories at all. And you know what? They still develop the same fears. They still dream about being chased through forests. They still have nightmares about being eaten alive. They still fear the dark, deep water, and strangers who smile too much. These stories aren't just entertainment, fam. They're not even just cultural transmission. They're genetic memory. They're the collected trauma of every human who ever lived, passed down through our DNA and expressed through narrative. Every time you get a chill down your spine during a horror movie, every time you check the back seat of your car before driving, every time you feel uneasy about someone who's being just a little too friendly, that's not learned behavior. That's your ancestors screaming at you from the grave. Don't trust it. Run. In ancient China and Japan, storytellers understood that honor could be more deadly than dishonor, and that duty could devour a person more completely than any demon. In the original ballad of Mulan, after 12 brutal years of war, she comes home not to medals, not to parades, but to ashes. Her father, whose life she risked everything to protect, is already dead. Her service becomes meaningless, her duty wasted. She returns to an empty house, a hollow future, and, in some variations, she chooses suicide. Because honor can be deadlier than any blade, and duty hungers like a wolf that eats its own cubs. Enter Disney. Suddenly Dad is alive and spry. Suddenly generals bow, emperors cheer, and Shang is basically trying to date her while still processing his repressed bisexual crisis. Instead of tragedy, we get a talking dragon, a cricket sidekick, and a fireworks finale. It's like someone took an opera of blood and sacrifice and said, "What this needs is Eddie Murphy as a lizard." The bitter truth? Many modern soldiers and military families resonate with the original Mulan more than the sanitized one. Sometimes you serve, sacrifice, and bleed for a cause, only to find the cause doesn't even remember your name. Sometimes you do everything right and still lose everything. That's not a children's story, that's Veterans Affairs paperwork. Imagine explaining the original ending to a Disney executive. So, she kills herself out of despair. Love it, but can we add a sassy dragon instead? Suicide doesn't test well with 6-year-olds. And thus, duty's horror became karaoke-worthy feminism with a side of dumplings. A celestial love story turned nightmare. The cowherd and the weaver girl fall in love, only for divine authority to rip them apart forever. Their punishment? They can meet only once a year, across the Milky Way, walking a bridge of magpies. Sounds romantic, until you realize it's an eternity of longing. A cosmic slow torture where every reunion is just a reminder of the endless separation ahead. Western retellings soften it. Instead of eternal punishment, we hear, "Ah, how sweet. They get one special night each year." That's like saying, "Ah, how romantic. You only get to see your spouse during tax season." Long-distance relationships, immigrant couples torn apart by borders, military deployments. This is a pain we know all too well. But we've trained ourselves to rebrand it as romantic. Like Hallmark selling happy long-distance anniversary cards, as if crying into your phone on FaceTime at 3 a.m. is love's highest form. Imagine the Weaver girl trying Tinder. Available one night a year. Must like magpies. Don't ask about the other 364 days. Or the cowherd explaining it to his friends. "Yeah, we're together." Kind of. It's complicated. Literally a Facebook relationship status, but celestial. What gets erased in the sanitized version is the comedy of the cruelty. The gods basically invented the world's worst long-distance plan. Unlimited yearning, 0 rollover minutes. In West African traditions, Anansi the spider wasn't a cute trickster. He was a cautionary tale about cleverness without wisdom, about how the smartest person in the room can still destroy themselves through pride. Anansi the spider, the horror they erased. Anansi's tricks often backfired spectacularly, leaving him humiliated, injured, or trapped by his own cleverness. His stories were warnings about the dangers of unchecked cunning. how it was sanitized. Western children's versions present him as harmlessly mischievous, always landing on his feet. Social media culture has created millions of mini-Anansis, people whose clever content and viral tricks eventually backfire, destroying careers and relationships. The original warnings about cleverness without wisdom feel prophetic. Picture a Victorian father, watching his children play in the garden of his London townhouse, while industrial smoke chokes the sky and cholera lurks in the Thames. He opens a book of fairy tales, the old ones, the ones he heard as a child, and finds stories of child abandonment, rape, and murder. He cannot bear it. Not because the stories are untrue. His world is full of abandoned children working in his factories, women with no legal rights, casual violence as entertainment. He cannot bear it because these stories remind him that all his progress, all his civilization, all his proper Christian society is a thin veneer over the same human darkness that has always existed. So he begins to edit. Not the world, that would be too hard. The stories. Perfect, these two are already razor sharp. They just need that extra edge of gallows humor and absurdity to show the ridiculous gap between the raw originals and the sanitized Disneyfied versions. Here's an expanded, darker but funny take. In Giambattista Basile's original, Sleeping Beauty doesn't get a charming kiss. She gets impregnated in her sleep by a king who finds her unconscious. She doesn't wake up to true love, but to the cries of her newborn twins suckling on her finger and accidentally removing the cursed splinter. This is not a romance. It's basically the medieval version of, "Congratulations, you've been unconscious for 9 months. Here are your kids." Perrault came along and thought, rape's a bit much. Let's try a kiss. The brothers Grimm said, let's just make it a really nice kiss. Then Disney said, forget consent issues entirely. Let's sell it as romance. Throw in a castle and a soundtrack, boom. Generations of children have grown up believing the original moral was true love waits, when in fact it was closer to lock your doors when unconscious royalty are in the area. In the #MeToo era, the sanitized version is actually creepier than the original. At least Basile admitted this was a horror story. Disney turned a violation into a Valentine's Day card. Imagine explaining to kids, well, Timmy, she wasn't kissed awake. She was assaulted. But don't worry, the mouse in red shorts fixed that detail. If HR departments wrote fairy tales today, Sleeping Beauty would open with a giant consent form stapled to the spindle. And Disney's version? It's the romantic equivalent of saying, don't worry, honey, I kissed you while you were asleep. It was magical. Try that in real life and you don't get a wedding, you get a restraining order. Picture Walt Disney in 1937. The Great Depression still clings to America. People want joy, not nightmares. Walt looks at Snow White and sees a story of cannibalism, child murder, torture, and a queen getting cooked alive in red-hot iron shoes. Then he looks at his animators all hunched over and says, you know what this needs? Songs, whistles, maybe a few dwarfs with funny hats. Oh, and let's delete the part where she's forced to dance herself to death. And just like that, the darkness evaporates into a cloud of bluebirds and catchy choruses. Walt didn't just sanitize fairy tales. He built a factory that industrialized the process. Tragedy in, Technicolor magic out. It's like someone fed Silence of the Lambs into a Disney machine and got Lammy and the Magical Friendship Farm. Hans Christian Andersen's mermaid isn't a plucky teen with great hair. She makes a brutal trade. Her voice for legs that cut her with every step, like walking on broken glass in bare feet, forever. She gets no happy ending. The prince marries someone else. Her choices: murder him in his sleep or dissolve into sea foam. She chooses self-dissolution, becoming an airy spirit condemned to centuries of good deeds before she can finally earn a soul. This isn't love conquers all. This is, sometimes love annihilates you, and all you get for it is a slow metaphysical internship. Disney came along and said, "What if?" She kept her voice, got the boy, had a wedding, and everyone sang along. Also, let's give her a crab that talks like he's from Jamaica. The agony, the knives, the slow spiritual redemption, all gone. Now it's just teenage rebellion and dad learning to let go. Anderson's version is painfully relevant to anyone living with chronic pain, to anyone who's loved someone who never loved them back, to anyone who's sacrificed everything for a dream and ended up with nothing. Disney's version? It teaches children that transformation is painless, every love is reciprocated, and sacrifice is optional. Basically, go under the knife and you'll live happily ever after. Real Little Mermaid. Every step feels like stabbing knives. Disney Little Mermaid. Every step feels like a Broadway tap number. Real ending. She dissolves into foam, her sacrifice erased. Disney ending. Here Comes the Bride. It's like Anderson wrote a novel about unrequited love, chronic pain, and spiritual longing. And Disney said, "Cool, but what if we make it about a crab singing in falsetto?" When European empires expanded, they didn't just seize land, bodies, and resources, they seized narratives. Indigenous stories weren't left alone. They were laundered, scrubbed, civilized, and stripped of their claws so European children could read them before bed without screaming. The result? Entire cultures' survival lessons turned into bedtime jingles. It's like taking a war manual and reprinting it as a coloring book. Sedna is betrayed by her father in the middle of a storm. He throws her overboard to save himself. When she clings to the kayak, desperate, he chops off her fingers one by one. She sinks into the black water, bleeding, her body claimed by the sea. Her severed fingers transform into seals, walruses, and whales, the animals her people must hunt to survive. It's horrifying, but it's also brutally honest. Survival is always paid for in flesh. Western versions say things like, Sedna lost her fingers in an accident, or she sacrificed her hands willingly for her people, as if she tripped on the ice, as if it was a noble choice instead of paternal butchery. Basically, oops, all whales. Climate change is doing to the Inuit what Sedna's father did, cutting off their hands, forcing them into loss for survival. The original story didn't shy from that truth. Sometimes the thing you love most is the thing you must lose. Imagine explaining the original Sedna to kids. So children, her dad chopped her fingers off. Why? Because otherwise they'd both die in the storm. Did she at least get a Disney sidekick? No, she got seal fingers. La Llorona drowns her children in the river after her lover betrays her. Rage, despair, betrayal, madness. She destroys the only beings she loves. Then she's cursed to wander forever, wailing, searching for them across waterways. This isn't a ghost story. It's a scream from the deep truth. Mothers can break, and sometimes they break violently. Children's versions say she lost her kids, or they wandered off. Sure, just like Jeffrey Dahmer's victims wandered off. Maternal rage, postpartum depression, filicide, these are not fairy tale fancies. They're terrifyingly real. The sanitized version does mothers no favors. It erases the warning. Imagine La Llorona in a modern parenting blog. Top 10 parenting hacks. Number 1. Don't drown your kids. And the sanitized bedtime story version is like, oopsies. Timmy wandered into the river again. Silly Timmy, because apparently eternal child murder is too scary, but negligent babysitting is fine. When the Arabian Nights hit Europe, translators like Antoine Galland got squeamish. Brutality, slavery, bloodshed, snip, snip, snip. They delivered a version of Middle Eastern tales polished for Parisian salons. What survived was magic carpets and open sesame. What got cut was boiling oil and knife dances. Ali Baba's real hero isn't Ali Baba, it's Morgiana, the slave girl. She saves him by boiling 40 thieves alive in jars. Later, she dances for the captain of the thieves, lures him in, and plunges a dagger into his heart mid-performance. It's not just murder, it's choreography. Children's versions make it all about Ali Baba and the magic words, open sesame. Morgiana becomes a footnote or disappears entirely. The bloody dance number? Cut for time. The original tale celebrated female agency in its rawest form, survival by cunning and violence. Sanitized versions return us to the old default, women as passive, men as the story stars. Disney Ali Baba, open sesame. Real Ali Baba, open crockpot. Thieves are done. Morgiana deserves her own action franchise. She's basically John Wick with better moves. Sinbad's voyages weren't all exotic islands and magical birds. They were meat grinders of horror, cannibal tribes, mass deaths, slavery, grotesque violence. He survived by shoving other people into danger, often using them as human shields. He wasn't an adventurer, he was a travel influencer with a body count. European retellings turned it into, wow, look at the giant rock. Wow, magical treasure. The bodies, the exploitation, the trauma all vanished. Sinbad became a jolly sailor instead of a morally bankrupt survivor. Sinbad is the original travel blogger. Look at this amazing place I discovered. Don't mind the suffering locals. Focus on the selfie. Modern adventure tourism does the same. Luxury safaris, cruise ships, Instagram influencers, hiding exploitation behind sunsets. Real Sinbad. Half my crew was eaten alive. But hey, free diamonds. Sanitized Sinbad. Come sail away. It's like Aladdin, but with more boats. Basically, the sanitized version is Lonely Planet. The real version is Apocalypse Now. In Carlo Collodi's original, Pinocchio isn't just a mischievous puppet. He's a walking cautionary tale. At one point, 2 assassins catch him, string him up by the neck, and hang him like a scarecrow. He dangles there, suffocating, abandoned. It's not a metaphor. It's execution by lynching in a children's book. Collodi's moral was simple. If you behave badly, you don't get grounded. You get hanged. Later adaptations thought, maybe we shouldn't traumatize 5-year-olds with puppet strangulation. Disney turned Pinocchio into a plucky little boy, whose worst punishment is a long nose and a stern lecture from a cricket. Real Pinocchio. Don't skip school, or assassins will literally hang you. Disney Pinocchio. Don't lie, or you'll look like you just had plastic surgery gone wrong. It's like replacing Saw with Sesame Street. Hans Christian Andersen didn't write a warm and fuzzy makeover story. The duckling is bullied, beaten, mocked, and nearly killed for being different. He's alienated, starved, chased by dogs, and frozen into the ice. The tale is basically, what if middle school lasted your entire childhood? The transformation into a swan comes at the end, but not before relentless humiliation. Modern versions turn it into a quick glow-up. A little sadness, then bam! Beautiful swan. Basically the Disney Channel version. A quick haircut, a new dress, and suddenly everyone claps. Real ugly duckling. Everyone hated me until I grew into a completely different species. Sanitized ugly duckling. Everyone's beautiful on the inside. Andersen's moral was brutal honesty. Sometimes life is unbearable until you escape into being someone else entirely. Modern moral. Don't worry, kids, puberty fixes everything. Poor Thumbelina. She's born tiny, then kidnapped by a toad who plans to marry her off to his slimy son. She escapes, only to be kidnapped again by a mole who wants to make her his underground bride. She's basically passed around like a doll in a nightmare version of The Bachelor. Andersen's story is filled with threat after threat. Forced marriage, imprisonment, exploitation. Thumbelina's life is less fairy tale and more human trafficking PSA. Modern retellings trim out the kidnapping, the threats, the arranged marriages, and focus on the happy ending where she meets a fairy prince. It's all love, flowers, and Disney sparkle. Real Thumbelina. Help. Every species in the forest is trying to forcibly marry me. Sanitized Thumbelina. She met a cute fairy and lived happily ever after. Andersen's version says, girls, the world is full of predators. Disney's version says, girls, the world is full of princes. In this story, a stepmother murders her stepson by tricking him into leaning over a chest, then slamming the lid down and cutting off his head. To cover her tracks, she cooks the boy into a stew and serves it to his father, who happily eats every bite. This isn't a fairy tale. This is Hannibal Lecter, the bedtime story edition. Modern retellings quietly shuffle this one out of circulation. At best, they replace the stew with disappearance, or the stepmother with a generic villainess. Basically, let's just not mention the cannibalism before bed. Real story. Eat your son, dear, he's delicious. Sanitized story. Eat your stew, dear, it's nutritious. The original moral. Parents can literally devour their children. The sanitized moral. Soup is good food. 12 princesses sneak out every night to dance with mysterious princes in a hidden underground world. The king offers a reward. Any suitor who solves the mystery wins a princess's hand. But here's the catch, fail and you're executed. Dozens of young men die trying. It's not whimsical. It's a blood-soaked dating game show. The Bachelor Hunger Games Edition. Modern retellings keep the glittery dresses and secret dancing but cut the execution detail. Now it's a harmless mystery about where do they go every night? Instead of which unlucky guy gets decapitated next? Real story. Dance or die. Sanitized story. Dance, then sigh. The sanitized version says, sneaking out at night is cheeky fun. The original says, sneaking out at night gets men killed. A princess is betrayed by her maidservant, who steals her identity and forces her into silence. When the truth comes out, the punishment is creative. The maid is stripped naked, stuffed into a barrel lined with nails, and rolled down a hill until she dies. This isn't poetic justice, it's medieval torture porn. Modern versions remove the barrel of nails. The maid might just disappear or repent, because apparently nothing says sweet dreams like visualizing a woman turned into a human cheese grater. Real Goose Girl. She was nailed, rolled, and shredded. Sanitized Goose Girl. She was told off and grounded. The sanitized lesson, don't lie, kids. The original lesson, don't lie, or you'll be converted into a medieval smoothie. Perrault's Donkey Skin is about a widowed king who decides the best way to honor his dead wife is to marry his daughter. Freud would have had a field day. The girl escapes by disguising herself in the hide of a magical donkey that poops gold. Yes, that's the actual escape plan. So, to recap, incest, bestial disguise, and golden excrement. Truly, the French invented surrealism long before Salvador Dali showed up. Modern retellings erase the incest and just say she runs away from home, which is like saying the Titanic had a minor boating mishap. Original lesson: if dad proposes, find the nearest donkey and crawl inside. Sanitized lesson: sometimes moving to a new town is tough. We all know the wolf huffs and puffs. But the original versions don't stop at blowing houses down. In some tellings, when the wolf finally tries to sneak down the chimney, the pigs boil him alive and eat him. So really, it's less about resilience and more about the Great British Bake Off Carnivore Edition. Later retellings leave out the boiling and turn it into, the wolf ran away, never to bother them again, which is code for, we couldn't put pig-led cannibalism in the little golden books. Original ending: the wolf became pork stew. Sanitized ending: the wolf became unemployed. The sanitized moral: hard work pays off. The original moral: hard work pays off in wolf soup. In Aesop's darker versions, the boy isn't just embarrassed when the wolf actually comes. He's eaten. End of story. The villagers don't arrive in time, and the shepherd boy's bones are the punchline. This isn't a fable. It's a PSA for child mortality rates in ancient Greece. Later tellings keep the boy alive so he can be ashamed of his lies, because apparently death by wolf was deemed too harsh. But lifelong social embarrassment was the perfect bedtime moral. Original ending: don't lie or you'll be lunch. Sanitized ending: don't lie or people won't trust your tweets. Pandora wasn't just a curious woman who opened a mystery box. She unleashed every single evil into the world. Disease, famine, war, death, TikTok comment sections, you name it. Humanity got cursed forever, and the only thing left in the box was hope, like a participation trophy from the gods. So yes, all of human suffering is her fault. Ancient Greek men basically invented the original blame the woman narrative. Modern versions make her sound like a curious child who let out some trouble, but luckily, she kept hope, which is like saying, Chernobyl wasn't so bad. At least people got new glow-in-the-dark pets. Original moral: women will doom us all, But hey, at least we can still hope. Sanitized moral. Curiosity is naughty, but everything will be fine in the end. Mama Taro. A sweet baby is found inside a peach, raised by kind old folks, and goes on a quest to defeat ogres with the help of cute animal friends. Everybody cheers. The ogres are reformed, and peace reigns. Early versions, the rated are cut. Imagine Pokemon but with actual murder. Momotaro didn't just defeat the ogres, he straight up slaughtered them. He stormed Ogre Island like a one-boy Viking raid. The animals weren't fluffy sidekicks. They were basically his mob hit squad. Dog mauls ogre ankles. Monkey rips out ogre eyeballs. Pheasant, a feathery guided missile. Together, they made Mortal Kombat look like Sesame Street. After the carnage, Momotaro and his adorable companions looted the ogre's treasure hoard like it was an 80s heist film. Basically, Japan's national children's hero was a tiny warlord with farm animal mercenaries. Urashima Taro. Sanitized version. A kind fisherman saves a turtle, is whisked away to a magical undersea kingdom, parties with a beautiful princess, and when he returns home, oh no, centuries have passed. Early versions, the oops, all existential crisis cut. Taro saves the turtle, yes, but when he gets to the dragon palace under the sea, it's not just a chill vacation. It's like Vegas without clocks. Days felt like minutes, food never ran out, and he probably danced with jellyfish under the influence of magical sake. The princess warns him, "Don't open this box, no matter what," which of course, like every single human in folklore history, he immediately does. Inside, not treasure, not secrets, just his entire mortality packed into a neat little container. He pops it open like a snack bag, and boom, instant wrinkly grandpa. He ages a few centuries in about 3 seconds and then crumbles into dust. It's the only bedtime story where the moral is, don't open random boxes, kids, or you'll speedrun aging like milk in the sun. Basically, Japanese parents were telling their kids, "Good night, sweetie, remember. If you're born from fruit, murder responsibly. And if a turtle offers you a box, maybe just say no." Hans Christian Andersen's The Red Shoes is already nightmare fuel, and Baba Yaga's stories make Saw look like Teletubbies. The Red Shoes, Denmark, Hans Christian Andersen. A sanitized version. A poor girl loves her beautiful red shoes a bit too much. She wears them to church, dances a lot, and eventually learns a vague lesson about vanity. End of story. Nope. The real story is basically, these shoes are cursed and will possess your feet like demonic Crocs. Once she slips them on, they force her to dance. Forever. No water breaks, no timeouts, just dancing with the stars. Eternal Torment Edition. After realizing she's doomed to become the world's most exhausted ballerina, she does what any reasonable fairy tale character does. Finds an executioner and begs him to chop off her feet. So, the next time someone says, "That song's a banger, I couldn't stop dancing," remember Karen in the red shoes. She literally couldn't stop, and it cost her both feet. Disney did not option this musical, shockingly. Vasilisa the Beautiful, Russia, Baba Yaga's House of Horrors. A sanitized version. Vasilisa, a sweet girl with an evil stepmother, meets Baba Yaga the witch. Luckily, her magical doll helps her survive. She returns home with a glowing skull that exposes her stepfamily's wickedness. Very Cinderella with a Slavic twist. Uncensored Baba Yaga cut. First off, Baba Yaga doesn't live in a quaint gingerbread house. She lives in a literal murder cabin on chicken legs. It turns around when you say the magic words like an Airbnb run by Satan. She also rides around in a giant flying mortar and pestle because, why not? Somewhere in Moscow, a grandma was probably just, yes, efficient transportation. Now, the stepmother doesn't send Vasilisa to Baba Yaga for fire because she's nice. Nope. She's basically signing the girl up for a cannibal buffet. Baba Yaga's favorite hobby? Cooking young maidens into stew. The tasks she gives Vasilisa, separating grains, fetching water, etc., weren't chores. They were warm-up rounds for who gets cooked next. And when Vasilisa finally leaves, she doesn't just get a nightlight. She gets a skull lantern with flaming eyes that she totes home like a medieval Halloween decoration. Spoiler: it incinerates her wicked stepfamily into ashes. Moral of the story? Always keep a creepy skull lamp handy. It solves problems. Lessons children were supposed to take away. From the Red Shoes: don't be vain, or you'll dance yourself into an amputation. From Vasilisa: be polite to your doll or Baba Yaga will saute you. Excellent pick, Fire Eagle. Ivan Tsarevich and the Firebird is basically Russia's answer to Pokemon Go. Except instead of catching cute birds, you get maimed, betrayed, and sometimes murdered. Let's expand the grim side with some humor. Ivan Tsarevich and the Firebird, Russia. A sanitized version. A brave prince named Ivan sets out to catch the magical Firebird. Along the way, he befriends a talking wolf, survives a few challenges, and returns home with the bird, the girl, and the glory. Basically, Disney's Anastasia if it were directed by Lisa Frank. Original Grimm versions, the rated B for brutal cut. Ivan's journey wasn't all magical birds and talking wolves. In older tellings, Ivan suffers the kind of betrayals that would make Shakespeare go, "Whoa! Dial it back, Russia." Oh, he gets the Firebird, sure. But then his own brothers betray him like it's an episode of Succession. Medieval edition. They don't just trip him up, they murder him. Sometimes by stabbing, sometimes by chopping him to pieces, sometimes by tossing him into a pit. Sibling rivalry, Russian style. Oh, resurrection? Yup. Ivan gets patched up with either magical water, living and dead water combo packs, or mystical birds that reassemble him like a jigsaw puzzle. Imagine Humpty Dumpty, except with more decapitations. Oh, in some retellings, before his big comeback, Ivan endures mutilations. Eyes gouged out, limbs cut off, you name it. He's less fairy tale prince and more trial version of Deadpool. Meanwhile, the wolf, his trusty companion, is basically carrying the entire story. Ivan's like, I've been betrayed, stabbed, blinded, and dumped in a ditch. And the wolf's like, bro, I got you. Climb on. Let's go full Uber XL. Moral children were supposed to learn. Sanitized. Be brave, and you'll win the prize. A Grimm. Your siblings will 100% murder you for clout. So always carry resurrection water and a talking wolf. The Tortoise and the Hare, Aesop, Greece/Africa. A sanitized version. The hare brags about how fast he is. The tortoise says, slow and steady wins the race. The hare takes a nap, the tortoise plods along, and boom, tortoise victory. Everyone claps. Lesson learned. Don't be cocky, kids. A harsher African parallels. The nature documentary directed by Tarantino cut. In some African retellings, the hare doesn't just lose the race, he gets wrecked. The tortoise doesn't do a victory dance, he does a revenge arc. Oh, sometimes the hare is beaten senseless. Oh, sometimes he's humiliated in front of the entire animal kingdom. Oh, and in a few brutal versions, the hare is killed for his arrogance. Like, congratulations, you fell asleep. Permanent nap time. The moral wasn't slow and steady wins the race. It was more, if you're a smug jerk, the tortoise will personally arrange your funeral. Sedna, Inuit mythology, a sanitized version. Sedna becomes goddess of the sea after some vague betrayal. Now she rules over marine life, and Inuit hunters honor her so she'll release seals and fish. It's told gently, like a cultural origin story with respect and reverence. Original tale, the Frozen horror show cut. Nope. The real myth starts with Sedna being tricked into marrying a birdman. Yes, half man, half bird. Tinder options were rough back then. When she realizes her husband's a fraud, she flees with her father by kayak. The bird husband summons a storm to drag them down. Her dad, father of the year, decides, sorry, kid, better you than me, and throws Sedna overboard. She clings to the kayak, so he does the logical parental thing. Chops off her fingers. Oh, each finger falls into the water and becomes seals, walruses, whales. Oh, Sedna sinks into the depths, becoming queen of the underworld sea, managing all those animals like she's running Atlantis Inc. Basically, she becomes divine through finger-related workplace trauma. Her story is less Frozen's Elsa and more, my dad hacked off my hands. Now I control the ocean. Deal with it. What the kid-friendly morals became versus the originals. The tortoise and the hare. Don't brag versus brag, and you'll get murdered by a reptile. Sedna. Respect the sea versus your dad might amputate you, but at least you'll invent walruses. Oh, these are fantastic picks. We're moving from ghost mom trauma to kung fu chaos monkey. Let's crank up the humor with the dark originals. The Monkey King, Sun Wukong, China Journey to the West. A sanitized version. Sun Wukong is a cheeky, lovable trickster monkey who has fun adventures, flies on clouds, and beats up demons with his magic staff. Cartoon versions make him look like a kung fu Bugs Bunny. Original text, the monkey who needs therapy cut. The OG Sun Wukong was a menace. Imagine Deadpool if he were a monkey with ADHD and a god complex. Oh, he steals the peaches of immortality from Heaven's Garden like a furry Ocean's 11. Oh, he crashes Heaven's banquet drunk and trashes the place like a frat bro with divine powers. Oh, when the gods try to stop him, he literally rips through armies, eats celestial horses, and smashes people's skulls with his staff. Oh, even Buddha has to trap him under a mountain because nothing else works. This is after he declares himself great sage, equal of heaven, which is basically a monkey telling the universe, I'm CEO now. Redemption only comes later, when he's forced to escort a monk to India for scriptures. And even then he's like, fine, but I'm still going to hit demons with my stick every 5 minutes. A Monkey King, cheeky hero saves the day. Sometimes the most violent, chaotic troublemaker in history becomes a religious icon. but only after Buddha sits on him. At the frog prince the horror they erased. The princess doesn't kiss the frog tenderly. She hurls him against the wall in a rage, shattering his amphibian form through violence. The transformation comes through brutality, not love. How it was sanitized. The kiss replaced the violence, transforming a tale about the necessity of brutality into a romance about the power of gentle affection. The message shifted from sometimes violence is necessary for transformation to love conquers all. Though we live in an era obsessed with consent and gentle touch, yet domestic violence statistics show that the original tale's understanding of transformative brutality might be more honest about human relationships than our sanitized version. Look at our justice system. Look at how we talk about criminals. Look at how we consume true crime content. We're still obsessed with the same themes: beautiful victims, monstrous villains, and violent redemption. These fairy tales were the original viral content. They spread across cultures, adapted and evolved, but kept their core message. The world is dangerous, trust no one, and violence is the ultimate problem solver. The really scary part? We sanitized them for kids, but we kept consuming the dark versions as adults. Horror movies, true crime podcasts, serial killer documentaries, it's all just Grimm's fairy tales with better production values. So next time you're watching a horror movie and thinking, how do people come up with this stuff? Remember that we've been telling these stories for thousands of years. The only difference is the special effects budget. The monsters were never under the bed, fam. They were in the bedtime stories all along. If this video messed with your head as much as it messed with mine while researching it, smash that like button, subscribe if you want more dark history content, and let me know in the comments. What fairy tale do you think needs the horror movie treatment?